Welcome to the Ron Johnson Discipleship Podcast.
Here we are again for your weekly dose of truth and hope. And we hope you enjoyed the last series that we were in, talking about a wonderful book, Strange New World.
Strange New World, yeah.
and Pastor Andrew and I have figured out that we do the podcast best when we have some jumping off places, and a good book is sometimes a great launch pad. So we have selected another great book. In fact, I think it's the perfect book to build upon where we ended, talking about kind of the psychological or the philosophical journey over the last several hundred years to get us into the crazy, messed up world that we're in today.
Yeah, and I think these books, in many ways, are cutting-edge ideas, philosophical ideas that talks about why we are the world today, and really gives a kind of a scholarly approach to the underpinnings of what's happening. Explain what's the rationale behind. It's less utilitarian, but more idealistic. But I feel like it's important for us to understand the world we're in today.
Yeah. I like to say, ideas are like the metaphysical infrastructure to the physical world. Everything in the physical world, and for instance, what's being done in public education or higher education, all started with an idea. I was just reading to kind of piggyback on what we came out of, how a lot of our urban public schools have ordered a whole hodgepodge of gender transitioning gear, because the fashionable thing now is to have a closet at school where you literally can go into the closet and you can begin transitioning into your new gender. And so they have all this crazy kind of paraphernalia, physical things, that help you create a new you, which is a metaphysical thing. And so once again, the idea world, the world of the spirit, comes before the world of the natural and the world of the flesh. And so when you're looking at the news today and you're seeing stuff happening where you're just scratching your head, you need to realize there's an idea behind that. And of course, we go all the way back. Ideas only come from one of two sources. It either originated with God and it's true, or it originates with Satan and it's a twist and it's a perversion of what God has said. So every idea you can trace back to its source, and there's only two sources.
Yeah, and I think when you deal with cancer and you have symptoms of cancer, you can often deal with the symptoms. You take an ibuprofen to help with the headache, but that doesn't solve the actual problem. And you got to identify what the actual problem is, which takes digging, which takes scholarly work, which takes research to look at the history and what happens. And I think that's what we're digging into is the heart of the bad consequences we see in the world today. The bad legislation we see today is the ideas. It's digging these ideas.
And you brought up a great point. It's not that we are overmatched in the area of ideas. The Christian worldview, I say this a million times, it is superior to anything because it is based on truth. The challenge for believers is that we learn our Christian worldview. It doesn't do us any good to have this incredible treasure house of wisdom that God has given us, but we're ignorant because we never do what you just said. We never do the hard work of understanding these things.
Well, and there's an army. I mean, to be fair, there's an army of elites who sits around pontificating about these radical ideas and off these branches, and they're paid. They're these.
Which I just want to say, if someone out there is feeling led to pay Pastor Andrew and I an exorbitant amount of money so we can sit around and think deeply about these things, you can call us, contact us. We'll consider your offer, all right? Then that way we could join the fray. But we got to raise kids and go to church.
Right, we got some work to do. But I think there are some great Christian thinkers. There's just not an army of them, and there's not a ready media that's ready to carry out every, traditional media or whatever, legacy media is ready to carry out their every whims and fancies.
Yeah. The media certainly amplifies those who disagree with us, and that's one of the problems.
Media, entertainment, songs, music.
Yeah, it's not that the truth's not out there. It's just that we don't have the megaphone.
But what I think this should do is equip you with the foundational ideas of saying, okay, wait, individualism. Let's think about individualism, radical individualism. Is that a good, logical, coherent idea to center everything about your feelings? You know,
right? How's that working?
How's that working for on the larger national scale? Like maybe in the specific moment, it's like a good feel-good story. But on national, historical level, is that a good idea? Everyone goes by their feelings.
Yeah, and part of one of the tests of a good worldview is it livable? And, it's great to have all these crazy theories, new ideas, radically new approaches. But at some point, it has to be livable. And I think what we're going to find out with some of the ideology that's put forth today is we'll look back 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and go, what a disaster, unfortunately.
More like 6 months from now.
Yeah, what a disaster. Yeah, absolutely. So let's transition. We're going to introduce a brand new book to you. And again, as we introduce these books, we encourage you to go out and pick up a copy and join us as we kind of make our way through. We hope it's helpful. Rod Dreher's book. Talk to us about the title, and we'll kind of get into the intro in the first chapter, maybe a little bit.
The title is interesting. It's called "Live Not by Lies," and which I didn't understand. That was a quote.
Direct quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who was a Russian dissident. Spent some time in the Soviet Gulag under Stalin. When he was exiled by the communists to the United States, he was a trumpet for truth, and really he spoke prophetically. God used him to speak prophetically in a lot of the Ivy League universities to basically condemn the West, that we have forgotten God.
Yeah.
That went over like a lead balloon because our Ivy League schools had abandoned God themselves.
Right.
And so here's this prophet who's coming literally out of a prison camp of horrors, and he's warning the United States to get back to her roots and warning individuals to return to God and return to truth. And he's being mocked at our universities in America. And that was back, I believe, in the 70s, I think, early 70s.
In the middle of the Cold War.
Yeah, and he, so here again, here's somebody, talk about spiritual blindness. Here's somebody who has lived through it, who watched the Soviets take over the country, bit by bit, and create this Holocaust, and he comes to the West, and we're so enamored with our pleasures and with our comforts that we have no ear to hear.
In the middle of sexual revolution.
All of that going on. Incredible financial blessing because of capitalism and free markets. All the freedom, everything that freedom has produced, we've perverted it.
Yeah.
And so it's ironic that you have someone like that who's saying, hey, it was a warning that if America and the West does not wake up, what was happening in the Soviet Gulag is going to be coming to the shores of America. And
I thought how Rod Dreher, how he started this book was very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
He basically got a call from a immigrant son, a doctor, very good doctor, but his doctor's mother saw what happened back in Indiana during the Religious Freedom Restoration Act battle, in which for those who remember, there was a pizzeria that someone asked, like, will you cater to a homosexual wedding? And this pizzeria was like, we wouldn't do that. Again, like, who caters pizza for
who gets
your wedding?
pizza for their wedding?
Anyways, the point was, and just the hatred that was unleashed upon that pizzeria. So that whole story really triggered this doctor's mother, who I forgot what country she came from, immigrated from, some Eastern Bloc European nation who underwent totalitarianism, fascism, whatever. And she saw that. She was so concerned. She talked to her son, who then called Rod Dreher and says, what was happening in my home nation is now starting to happen in the United States.
And we're talking about Indiana, a conservative state.
Yeah.
We're talking about this town was a rural town. I mean, it was not a big urban area.
I'm not talking about Chicago.
And so it actually was shocking to somebody who said, wait a minute, this is exactly what was going on back in my country under communism. And so when this is what we've been saying, I even alluded to it on Sunday's message, when you have people who have lived through hell and lived through these Eastern Bloc Soviet rule, satellite countries, and they're saying, hey, this is how it started. They're alarmed. They've seen it firsthand. We've got to listen to these people and learn from these people and have an attitude of posture. So share again the quote that kind of kicks off this book, because I think it kind of summarizes why the book was written.
You talk about Solzhenitsyn. He says, there's always this fallacious belief. It will not be the same here. Here such things are impossible. Alas, all the evils of the 20th century is possible everywhere on earth.
Yep. And so he's saying we can't sit back as Christians and just go, well, it'll never happen in the United States.
It won't happen in the United States.
There's no way that could happen, because it's happened all over the world, and it's foolishness and arrogance for us to suggest that if we ignore God, we will not end up in the same place.
Well, it's interesting because he even ended this chapters, Rod Dreher, talking to these immigrant friends of his who are very successful now in the United States, but they came from, they're very close to a fascism, okay? True fascism, not the fascism we just throw around in our world today. But anyways, and some of these advice that they're giving Rod Dreher was, there's no point writing this book because people won't know till they experience it themselves. I mean, kind of very fatalistic, kind of like America's doomed anyway.
It's kind of like the frog in the kettle, you know? You're sitting there and the frog in the frying pan and the heat gets turned up and you don't really know that it's happening to you until it's too late. Because that's what they experience.
That's what they experience. And Rod Dreher, I appreciate his response was like, well, I'm going to try to prove them wrong by writing this book for their kids and for my kids.
And praise the Lord he did that. I mean, we can't sit back kind of a fatalism.
No, and that's not our approach. Our approach is there is still God on his throne. The church, he's giving us keys to the kingdom, to the body of Christ.
Absolutely.
And then we give him the key. So we always have a shot. We always have a chance.
Yeah. And in fact, I want you to highlight along with me, just so people understand the tenor of this podcast, this is not doom and gloom, America's going to hell in a handbasket and there's nothing we can do about it. Just the opposite. We're seeing across the globe, people are waking up, especially over in Europe, where some of these progressive kind of ideology has been in place a little bit longer than what we're seeing on the shores of America. But people are sick of it. And we're seeing some big political victories that has the progressive mainstream media freaking out.
Well, the globalists, the Brussels. So it's interesting. They say, the United States is always like the decade behind Europe or something like that. You know, and in this case, I hope it's true, because you look at. I guess yesterday, the Italians elected
the first woman
prime minister. The party is called the Brothers of Italy, which is based on their national anthem. So they're going back to a nationalistic, kind of conservative. They call it right-wing party, and it was what's her name?
Yeah, Meloni.
Giorgia Meloni or whatever. But she was the first. She's becoming the first woman prime minister of Italy. Yeah. And this lady, I listened to one of her speech, man.
Oh yeah.
She was on fire.
I posted it on Facebook. You can go to my Facebook page. I was moved to tears, and that was just from reading the subtitles, because she's letting it rip in Italian. Yeah. And here's the radical stuff. You know, the mainstream media, they're so ridiculous. They said that, this is a threat she's a threat to democracy, and she's radical, right? And she's a fascist. So here's what makes her a fascist. She said, I'm a woman. I'm a wife. I'm a mother. I want my country to have boundaries and borders. I want our people to have a national identity. I want my children to have a gender identity. I mean, she's just talking about basically basic foundational common sense things that are necessary for a nation to survive. And there's nothing radical about any of her ideas. The only thing that's radical is how common sense they are.
Well, this is where the switch in definition makes a big difference, right? Because fascism used to mean, inflation used to mean something, gender used to mean something, fascism used to mean something. But now it's whatever the mainstream media defines it. Now fascism is defined right wing. So if you're conservative, you're fascism. Never connecting what true fascism was. Now if you're right wing, you're just fascist, because that by definition. Right.
It's just an incendiary term to throw out there like a hand grenade, to blow up, to cause bloodshed and violence and confusion. But we're going to get into this as we get into this book, because language is a huge thing. Yeah. In these totalitarian countries, language is used to redefine terms. So what was once black is now white. What was white is now black. Words are used that we think we're saying the same thing, but we're not saying the same thing at all. We make up new words. We've seen that over and over again. New words, which are simply propaganda.
We should make up some new words.
We should make up some new words. We should. Let's work on that for next.
We have no time. We actually have work to do. We got to raise kids and
Yeah, but if that major donor comes in, we're going to have time to sit around. You, come on, help us
out. There are people who sit around in these think tanks, and that's what they do, man. They come up. Okay, I won't go there. But I was listening to Steven Crowder, and he made a great point. He says, name one fascist party that advocates for more worse free speech.
Yeah, exactly.
Smaller government.
Yeah.
More local government. More small central government.
The right to protect yourself.
And the right to bear arms.
Yeah.
So more people can
what
protect
fascist
themselves.
government ever promoted?
That was such a good point to think through that and be like, wait, what? How is that fascism when we want power to be decentralized?
Yeah, and that's what you're saying. Let's. The goal of all these tyrannical governments is to remove the identity of the people. If you have no borders, you have no nation.
Yeah.
If you remove the history of your nation and you rewrite it, you have no roots. If you redefine the family, you have no family roots. If you redefine gender, you have no gender roots. Yeah. You don't even know who you are. You don't even know what sex you are.
So what gives your identity? The government.
Exactly.
The government, the federal government gives you identity, tells you what you should do, what you shouldn't do. It removes all these other identifying factors, religion, churches, family, tradition, institutions, and then all you have is the government.
You hit the nail on the head.
Brave new world.
It is globalism. It is one world government. It is the power to government to tell you how to live, how to think, what is good, what is bad, and whatever the government says is good or bad, that's the truth. That's the new reality. And so you can see where a woman, first elected woman who should be celebrated by every feminist group in America, right? She stands up, and I watched her boldly in their gathering of parliament or whatever. She is a prophetic firebrand. I mean, this is a woman who takes no prisoners. She is telling it like it is. And the common people are giving her standing ovations because they know what's at stake. And so I applaud her. But, and then you mentioned some other.
It's not just Italy,
Greece, right?
Not Greece. Sweden. Of all nations, Sweden is like the boss. It's the Massachusetts of Europe.
Well, and
just California, Europe.
Sweden embraced this progressive, no borders, just let everybody come in, and they had a massive influx of Islamic folks. Mm-hmm. Many of them who are radicalized, and now I was reading they're having multiple bombings every day in Sweden. Not to mention violence in the streets, rapes, violence against women. This is happening every day. Those people are starting to go, wait a minute, what in the world? What kind of naive world were we living in where we think we could just open our borders to anyone, even if they don't share our same views about life or our same worldview? Anyway,
France, of all nations, France. I know Macron is still the president, but I think recently they had an election with a different parliamentary, and the Nationalist Conservative Party, whatever you want to call it, I forgot the name of it, Le Pen's party. She didn't win, but the party took a lot of seats. What's happening in Hungary, what's been happening in Poland.
Yeah.
So
and let's talk about the United States, because the media certainly won't talk about. All they're talking about is they're still trying to make the abortion issue a wedge issue.
And let me just talk about that real quick. The abortion wedge. In Europe right now, I read that so many people are approaching the issue of abortion and pro-life from the perspective of demographics. In other words, we're losing our culture. We don't have people anymore. Yeah. So one of the reasons we need to be pro-life is simply to sustain our culture, to have kids.
Like a nation like France, which has been very godless since the French Revolution, and very much not pro-family in terms of having families, period. And as the demographics are going now, France will not exist in a matter of years because they simply can't replace their nation.
Right.
And so what a strange twist.
It's just interesting approach towards this whole choice versus life, whatever. It's like, no, you know what? We need to sustain our nation. So it becomes almost a utilitarian. See, it starts with utilitarian, like we just need to abort our baby so we can have, whatever. Now it's utilitarian because we need to replace ourselves. Yeah. We need to provide for the elderly. We need people.
And I saw even communist nations like Russia were incentivizing their people to have children, to have families by paying them to have X amount of kids, because they get it. There will not be a nation. So we're not dealing with the global alarmists have it all wrong. We're not dealing with overpopulation at all. The biggest threat to the world is underpopulation, which fits our worldview.
Right. I think Jordan Peterson was talking about this radical environmentalism that's caused all these European nations to be utterly dependent on Russia right now because for their fuel, because these postures they took towards environmentalism.
Energy prices are shooting up, and people can't
This
afford
winter is going to be very interesting. But he made a statement. He says but these energy policies don't make sense. They don't even help the environment. He says, at some point, I'm paraphrasing, we have to conclude that this is not pro-environment. These policies are anti-human.
Right.
That was crazy. I was like, wow, he actually said it. We've been talking about that for
But
forever.
some of these ideologies are anti-human because we worship nature, we worship a whole host of other things more than people.
And look at what the series has been talking about. Who hates the image and likeness of God? You talk about all of us who are human beings bear the image. We're a bunch of statues of the living God. And you talk about in our sermon series. Check out our series, Me. On our
we just
YouTube
did
channel.
9 weeks on identity, and if you are not part of our church family or you live out of the region, we encourage you to go and take that in. We talk about a lot of these issues and laid a biblical foundation for human worth and value and dignity.
And that's a powerful point, that we were made to become image bearers so we're a bunch of statues or portraits of God, reflections of God. But anyway, who wants to destroy all these? Who hates God and wants to destroy all these?
Yeah, all of this is ultimately spiritual.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the roots of all.
When I heard him say that, I was like, wow, he actually called out that agenda.
Yes.
So, anyway.
So in this book, what he's doing is comparing communism with Western liberal democracy. And you wouldn't think those two things would have much in common. But the roots and the expression of that are very, very similar. Yeah. And he begins by saying this. He says, elites and elite institutions are abandoning old-fashioned liberalism. Of course, old-fashioned liberalism was based in defending the rights of the individual. The liberals back in the day were all about free speech, all about protecting individual liberties. We got organizations like the ACLU and groups like this that were dedicated to protecting individual liberty and free speech. Of course, they've all been radicalized now. But here's what happened. Defending the rights of the individual was replaced with a progressive creed that regards justice in terms of groups. And man, is that happening right now in America. So for instance, according to critical race theory, if you're white, you're a racist. It doesn't matter that there's no individual scrutiny or discrimination. If you're white and you're in that group, by definition, you're an oppressor and you're a racist. Mm-hmm. And so now we're looking at dividing and carving up America in terms of these special interest groups. Instead of looking at individual liberties, we're looking at that through the lens of groups, which is scary because we saw this with Hitler, with the Jews. With the trade unions. There's a whole bunch of groups that he systematically began to demonize and stigmatize based on their group identity, not based on who they are as individuals.
Which is, even this ideology contradicts this radical individualism, which says, hey, I want you to know you for you,
Good point.
For who you are. Well, when you identify people with a group, you're negating their personal experience, their personal history, their personal character, their personal choices.
Right. So you're poisoning people. You're making racism about color when racism transcends all colors. Racism's in the heart of fallen human beings. It doesn't matter what color you are. You're going to have to deal with that.
Yep.
So now we have good people. All we've done is we've taken racism and we've reversed it.
Yep.
And now we put the oppressed group. They're the victims of everybody else who are the racists.
Right.
He goes on to say here, and encourages people to identify with groups, ethnic, sexual, and otherwise, and to think of good and evil as a matter of power dynamics among the groups. Of course, we talked about that's the Marxist twist.
Yep.
A utopian vision drives these progressives, one that compels them to seek to rewrite history and reinvent language to reflect the ideals of social justice.
Yeah, we talked about utopianism before.
If you rewind the tape in America, back to the last election cycle, we had groups burning cities down. It was all done under the name of justice, of redistributing, what's that word? Retributive justice. In other words, it's okay that they're robbing and pillaging because they deserve it because of what's been done to them in the past. We saw statues pulled down. We saw people renaming things. It was all under this progressive push towards a utopian culture. It requires, and this is where it aligns with that soft totalitarianism, it requires that you rewrite history as it's been taught. And so we're seeing a big push now to get away with Western civ and taught in our universities, some of the great ideas and great thinkers that led to who America is today. We're throwing all that out. We have to completely rewrite history from a lesbian perspective, a gay perspective, a queer perspective, a black perspective, whatever the perspective is. We have to have certain months dedicated to different groups in an effort to rewrite history or to include them in history in a stronger way. But a lot of it's ideological. And then the language that comes with it is also loaded, as you mentioned, loaded with new meaning and new understandings. In other words, words don't mean what they used to mean in the past. And the sad thing is, go ahead if you want to jump in.
I was going to say, you mentioned soft totalitarianism. You might want to explain that to our listeners real quick.
Yeah.
What that means,
Yeah, so what he's pointing out here is under the Soviet style of totalitarianism, it was called hard totalitarianism. In other words, you're part of that group, we're going to kill you, or we're going to imprison you, or we're going to...
Strong-handed, the government.
Strong-handed, there was very clear, it was physical punishment, consequences, like death camps. And, listening to the book I read about a former Auschwitz survivor, he said the first thing that happened was if you were a Jew, you could not go to college. So imagine, if you're part of a class that doesn't fit the ideology or you disagree, you're automatically not given privileges. In fact, right now in communist China, there's a social credit score where, because they have cameras everywhere, if you violate the orthodoxy of the party, you get points against your social credit score. And if you get so many points, you're not allowed to travel. You're not allowed to fly anywhere. You're not allowed to leave the country. Eventually, you're not allowed to purchase things. You're certainly not allowed to go to the finest schools in communist China. I had been reading where a lot of what was going on with the current pandemic protocol and all this was to see how ready Americans are to receive kind of a top-down social credit kind of system, like wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, practicing social distancing, not practicing social distancing, getting the shot, not getting the shot.
Right.
What they're measuring...
Your social media posts.
Exactly. They're measuring the willingness to push back.
Yeah.
And when people just become blind sheep, willing to walk off the cliff, follow the sheep in front of them without thinking, Stalin called these people useful idiots. Because they're so submitted to groupthink and to the government that they lose their will to even push back, and they certainly don't have the courage to push back. And so it's interesting that's what hard totalitarianism is. There are physical consequences, painful consequences for going against the party or the government. Soft totalitarianism just comes at you in subtle ways. Or not so subtle ways, but not so much physical ways. In other words, no one's coming, you're not getting vaccinated, we're carting you off to jail. We didn't quite see that, although we saw that a little bit to our neighbor to the north in Canada.
Right. But you lose your job.
Right.
You can't travel.
They will, like you said, you lose your livelihood. They will trash your reputation.
Yep.
So, for instance, if you're a university professor and you're moving towards being tenured, and you're at a place where it used to be free speech was celebrated, right, in the classroom, dialoguing ideas, and now you come out and say men can't have babies. Boom, you're fired.
Yep.
And or you're blacklisted, and people attack you.
Right.
They get out in front of your house and protest and threaten your kids.
Right.
I mean, this is all based on fear and intimidation, and the goal of soft totalitarianism is to take away our voices.
Yeah.
It's to get people to self-censor. And this is what's happening a lot today. In fact, there was just a survey that was done that said many people have serious problems with CRT and all this crazy gender ideology that's being shoved down our throats in our public schools. But the reason they won't say anything is for fear of retribution.
Well, let's look at what happened with the FBI targeting conservatives. Yeah. I was listening to a polling yesterday, conservative polling. He's saying whatever poll there is right now for the midterms is actually underrepresenting conservatives, because when pollsters call the conservatives, there are some conservatives who don't even want to tell the pollsters that they're leaning right because they don't want to be because of the fear of being targeted by the FBI.
Or if I get those kind of calls, I don't know who's taking the poll.
Right.
So I'm not going to tell what I really believe because unless I know who's taking the poll, because that could be used, strategized and used for opposition, research. And so I'm just keeping my cards close to my chest for me, not because of fear, but for me because I don't trust the media. I don't trust government. There's a lot of groups I trust.
So can I share a quick story that talks about that? Even the way we're thinking right now, we're under soft totalitarianism.
Yeah,
just the way we're even, like, when someone calls us and asks you for a polling for the political views, our first thought is, where is this person coming from? Are they targeting me? Are they watching me? Man, how far have we really gone?
That's a good point.
I just want to share even, I'm immigrant. I actually immigrated from Taiwan myself, and my parents both went through the Civil War. My grandparents fought in the Civil War in China. So what happened in China is, it's close to my heart.
Yeah.
Then, but I didn't know that much about it because I grew up in Taiwan, which was a democracy, a democratic republic, and then I immigrated to the United States when I was 8 years old. But I heard stories. Right? And then in my 20s, I watched this movie called To Live. It's a Chinese movie, and I think it's been banned in China. It talks about what happened during the whole Cultural Revolution. I remember watching that, and just there was a scene in which it was a powerful scene. I recommend people. Oh man, it was such a excruciating experience to watch that movie. It was a real representation of what a normal person lived through during the Cultural Revolution in China. And there was a scene which like everything's about the party at that moment, and they have like a communal meal time.
Right.
And there's one kid who his sister was being bullied by another kid, so he took some noodles and whatever, he poured it on the bully's head. Okay, so he just caused a mess. Well, the bully's dad starts calling this kid and his family, starts saying, "You are rebelling against the government."
Wow.
So instead of like talking about, you shouldn't do that to my son, let's just address this issue, he started using these social accepted verbiage to attack this
and the
family.
last thing you want to do is go against the government.
And you see the hesitation in this dad who saw his son. I mean, this is a issue between kids. And the fear he had that all of a sudden this becomes about like the government's overlooking me, and I could be considered a rebel. I could be considered I'm against the Communist Party. My whole family could be killed because of this. Now it's like the fear of everything, and the look on his face, and all of a sudden he starts chewing out his own son, even though his own son wasn't. He didn't start it
as minor as a schoolhouse disagreement,
and he was being bullied. And I remember watching that just thinking, man, that's a horrible place to live in which you feel the oppressive weight of the government. Anyone could just turn on you and say, you're a bigot, you're a racist, you're whatever, even though you're totally not any of that.
So that's the hard totalitarianism. The soft totalitarianism, I just read where there are school systems where the teacher says, teaching all the transgender and progressive sexual ethics now, and says, okay, if you believe that this is good and right, stand on that side of the room.
Geez.
And if you disagree or you believe this is wrong, stand on this side of the room. And there might be two kids brave enough, they're standing all by themselves over here while their whole classroom and their teacher is glaring at them.
Yeah.
That's soft totalitarianism. Yeah. That is, we're going to push this agenda. We're going to publicly shame students who don't go along with it. Eventually, they'll be removed from their classroom because they'll be hateful. Their behaviors will be interpreted as being hateful. Right. And this is the beginning. This is the path toward hard totalitarianism. It's a soft. It's really not soft. It's equally painful. I mean, it hurts to lose your livelihood. It hurts to lose your reputation. It hurts to be kicked out of a school or fired from your job. These things hurt. It's just not somebody shooting you in the head. But the shooting you in the head comes later if we allow this kind of stuff to happen.
But that sense of fear, the sense of like, I have to double think and think like, how should I answer? Should I answer truthfully or not? Man, we are really in that right now.
No, and you bring on a real good point. When self-censoring happens, you're already down the pathway to soft totalitarianism. Whenever we're having to think, like, it's ironic that in the providence of God, we're doing this podcast on what we're doing it on. When just last week we received a social credit. Our credit score got dinged.
We got dinged our
social credit because we spoke about something that was off script. Now, what was off script was not radical. It was not perverted. It was not talking about nasty things.
No, if you talk about those things, you won't get censored.
Oh, yeah. You can be as crude and rude and vulgar as you want to be and probably get good highlights. But our sin was talking about election integrity. Now, again, that is soft totalitarianism. It is the big media tech companies that are progressive in their ideology, far to the left, who are basically dictating the terms of what gets talked about on their platform. Now, again, I get it. It's a private company, and you can do all that, but not when it violates our liberties, God-given liberties, and our First Amendment rights. Now we're seeing a massive collision on those things. So anyway, this was, I hope, a good introduction on where we're going to be going. I can't think of anything more relevant than what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
So I hope you find this helpful. Now, Pastor Andrew and I are going to pause here and say goodbye to you all, because we're going to come back and do another podcast as he is going to be out of town next week. So this will look like next week, but it's actually this week, and we're getting ahead of you. But we hope you enjoy it. Please share this far and wide, and we hope it'll be a big help to you. All right, have a great week.